I help you? What?
So I just started that. Did you hear that on your end?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, everything's okay. All right.
everything's great. There we go. So I'm doing a project for my school's program called Apollo, where you get
Yeah.
to do four individual projects on whatever you would like to learn about. So for
Uh-huh.
my project number two, I chose jazz in post the time frame was post World War I, which is very broad, but I wanted to focus mainly in New York City, and I figured that you grew up there, and it might be cool to have your perspective.
All right. So I don't really know too much about early post
Yeah,
World War.
yeah.
But I am 84, so I cover a lot of stuff. So do you want to ask me specific questions, or should I give you a kind of an overview?
So first, can you introduce yourself? And
Yes, my name is Susan Rothschild. Do you need to know more about me?
no, that's great. And then
Okay.
what what was your father's business?
My father owned, with his cousin, a restaurant called 21. It was called Jack and Charlie's 21. It was started during Prohibition in the Greenwich Village, and then during Prohibition, it moved up to 52nd Street, which is a famous street in New York, certainly 40s, 50s, into the early 60s, where there were a lot of jazz clubs. There was Eddie Condon's, there was Leon and Eddie's, there was Toots Shor, he was a famous sports person that wasn't jazz, but people hung out there.
Yep.
It was called Swing Street, basically. And at that time, the drinking age was 18, and you also could get
Yep.
fake IDs. So, so that's so that was a famous street where people hung out. So, and a lot of jazz happened there.
So I
And
know you said growing up there wasn't much of a scene for young people. What did you
no, well, it's not like today. I mean, there was really the popular music was very bland, and but the jazz scene was much more interesting. So it attracted, I don't know what the equivalent would be today, what kind of music, but it attracted sort of, it was pre-beatnik, it was bohemians basically. And oh, there was a famous place called Birdland. So all these places I'm mentioning, you can look up their YouTubes and videos and interesting articles about all those places. But there was like the Vanguard, and there was Birdland, and I never went up to Harlem, but there were famous places up there too. And so you would go and listen to jazz, and and there were the drugs, I guess, in those days were marijuana and cocaine, but cocaine was not as pervasive. And it wasn't, the musicians were all taking heroin, or they all took drugs. I don't think all the people that went took drugs. So it wasn't totally a drug scene. But the jazz was different kinds of jazz, progressive or East or West, or big bands from the 40s, or smaller groups. You might want to check out, oh, I can't remember the whole name of the group. Paul Desmond. I don't know. Have you heard of him?
I have? I'm
I
yeah.
He was fantastic. He was a friend of mine. How long is it going to take you to do this project? I mean, when
I
does it have to
have
be in?
I have pretty much until Thanksgiving.
Okay. I have something written about Paul at his funeral. If I can find that when I get back to Miami, I'll make it available to you.
Thank you.
Um,
That would be
so
wonderful.
uh, I don't know what else to tell you. All right. So there was also a late night disc jockey called Symphony Sid. Do you
Okay.
know about him?
I don't.
Well, write that down. You're going to want to check that out.
Okay.
Um, and who else would you want to check out? Well, there's Birdlands. There's a place called Bradley's, which was later, but Thelonious Monk was there. I saw him play and throw up all over the piano. Um, and then there, just if you look up the jazz clubs of that era, the 50s was really big on many kinds of jazz, experimental, and some of it was big, still the big bands. So, but it was not really like thousands of kids listening
Yeah.
to this. It was really just, those years were just really before the Beatles. And once the Beatles came in and those groups and Bob Dylan, the whole music scene changed completely and morphed into what it is today, where thousands and thousands of kids are, going to all these huge concerts. Now, there were a few major jazz concerts. There was one in Newport, and then there was one in California. I can't remember which either of those were called, but you could check those out. And those were not as big as like Woodstock, but a lot of people came
Very
to those.
large.
Musicians came all over to play.
So
So
growing up, did you spend a lot of your time in all of these places? Did you,
yes, I did. I was basically a juvenile delinquent. My parents were always out entertaining and being entertained, and my sister, brother, and I were sort of abandoned to the maid and the housekeeper and the cook and the chauffeur and a whole troop of help that really could not control us. So at around 15, I had a friend who was a year older than me named Bunny. And actually, I'm trying to find her now and I can't. But she took me to Birdland for the first time. She introduced me to grass, marijuana, whatever you call it. And so basically, once I discovered jazz and I had my fake ID, I was all set and I really loved it. And I was sort of, I mean, growing up in the 50s was a very uptight period. And I just naturally rebelled against that. So I did spend a lot of time in those jazz places, listening to music of different kinds. At Birdland was great. And Birdland, check that out. There was a strange little person who was the master of ceremonies. And we didn't know whether he was a man or a woman or a midget or a dwarf or what the person was, but he was a fascinating little figure in that place. So, I mean, if you do some research on
yeah,
Birdland,
I
because
will.
that's major.
Yeah, it sounds very entertaining to learn about.
Well, I mean,
So,
it was fun. It was a fun time, I have to say.
so
Um,
Birdland was your personal favorite?
Birdland was the biggest place, had the most musicians, and you could kind of get lost in the crowd there. The other places, there's the Village Vanguard, and there were a few others. I can't remember their names right now, but if you look that up, you'll look up the West Village in the
All the,
50s. That was basically the 50s into the early 60s was when that was like my jazz period. And then after a while, I don't know, I went to college and then I worked and I didn't go to that many jazz performances. And then other music came in and I liked the opera, so I went to that, and other things happened.
did your father's restaurant have a lot of big bands play, or was that
No,
much more?
that restaurant had no music except at Christmas when those people came and played, not the Red Cross, what are those people called? Salvation Army.
Oh,
They were
okay.
Christmas
Yep.
and play. No, that was a restaurant, and that restaurant started during Prohibition, and the people that came there were mostly, wasn't the jet set then. It was called Cafe Society, sort of. But there were movie people and politicians. Prohibition, you couldn't serve liquor. It was forbidden for
Yep.
those number of years. But they 21, and if you go on, CBS has a little video of what happened when you went. They showed Izzy and Mo were these two Prohibition agents who went around making sure nightclubs didn't sell alcohol. But the 21 had all the politicians going, so obviously they were going to make sure that they weren't going to get
Yeah.
into trouble. So when Izzy and Mo came, there was really a little door in the Joe sent me thing. And then you could see in this movie, the shelves behind the bar with the bottles collapsed and everything fell to the bottom, and the closets turned around. So it was coats instead of, so then they would come in. So it was just like a restaurant. It was called a club, but it really wasn't a club. There was a clothing rule that you had to wear certain things. And they always had extra ties and jackets for men who came inappropriately dressed.
So I read that the 21 Club had hosted every United States president since
Except one who
Wilson,
did.
maybe. I don't know. I don't remember
I don't
exactly who.
know. I saw Nixon there, and he was not as unattractive as he was in the, videos and things. He was not bad looking. Yeah, but who was it? It wasn't Clinton. I don't know. There's one guy that Trump hung out there.
That's what I was reading about that he skipped a bunch of his press conferences to go have steak at the 21 Club.
Yes,
So
yes. Um, yeah, I mean, famous people would go there all the time, but there was not music there. But they would have dinner there, and then they would go down the street to one of the other places to hear music.
did you not like hanging out at 21 because of that reason? Like there was nothing going on.
I could get it. Well, no, I always went to 21 because I didn't have to pay, and all my boyfriends were usually really poor. So we could have a free meal there. So I loved it. I loved going there. And gosh, I remember I like to drink milkshakes, and they didn't have that there. But across the street, there was one of a chain of restaurants in those days called Schraft's,
Okay.
and they would make a milkshake for me there and bring it to 21. I was so spoiled. I just can't tell you. I'm so lucky that I'm not really a disaster right now. Okay, what else?
So that was the scene. The scene was not specifically, obviously you had to be 18 to get into a lot of these clubs, so there was no teenage drama of all the kids going to this club and all the.
No, there really wasn't. It was very, and I'm just trying to think. Well, there were the same time there was like Pat Boone. There was a mainstream scene. There was a show from Philadelphia, which was one of the first shows that was integrated, and they had trouble with the networks, but they did it. So alongside the jazz, there was like the people doing the Lindy, which was a kind of a dance, and Bobby Soxers, and the clean cut. There was a movie, half Footloose.
Oh
Did you ever see
yeah,
Footloose?
yeah,
But that's later. But that's the kind of, that was the alternate scene
yep.
to the jazz scene. The jazz scene was very specific, and only a certain kind of either truly interested teenager or sort of affected arty teenager would be drawn to the jazz scene. Most of America was that other kind of music running alongside, um, that.
Was
So
that
there
like
was
was that like pre-rock era, like that sort of
Well, no, I mean,
different
rock
demographic?
really, well, I mean, I don't really know how, you could call my daughter Burns. She might have time to talk to you. She studied rock history in high school. We couldn't
Okay.
believe that was a class. Um, but no, I mean, there was always black music from the South. And I remember discovering when I was quite young, this incredible station, WWVA, which was in West Virginia. And they had amazing music. Oh, there was someone called the late great Johnny Ace, and there were the Penguins, and there were black groups that were pretty segregated from the white groups. I mean, it
Yep.
was really two different scenes, unlike today, where it's pretty, everybody's out there. They have their favorites, but everyone's out there sort of at the same time. So there's a lot of different kinds of music in America, and so much of it is from the black background that I don't know if people realize that now. I mean, Elvis basically took everything he learned. So there's many strands of music, and I'm not, I don't really know enough to tell you about that, but it's kind of a fascinating thing to study if you're really into that, where everything came from and where it kind of went and where it is now.
So that was another part of my questions was for black artists, were they treated, obviously that rise with the Harlem Renaissance and that boom was huge. Did that after that, when you were around, change how people perceived people of color for their music, like as just these superstars, like Louis Armstrong? Everyone knows Louis Armstrong.
Yes. Well, yeah, there's some people that like, or Ella Fitzgerald,
Yep.
those people, I don't, well, what do you mean exactly perceived by as black? What, tell me what you mean by that
I just
exactly.
mean a lot of these artists went from obviously from nothing in Harlem and no one knew any of
Right,
their names
right. Well,
to
some of them
stardom.
managed to just transcend, just like certain people today start nowhere and there's suddenly everybody Lady Gaga. I mean, some people manage in one way or another to just become superstars. But there was a lot of talent out there. And I think there was a lot of intermarriage and intermingling with jazz people, black people and white people then. Bird, whatever his real name was, a lot of them had rich white women who would take care of them, a lot of the entertainers or wives. Charlie Mingus had a white wife who's now doing a lot to make sure that his legacy is not forgotten. So I think the color barriers were much lower in that milieu, as maybe in any art milieu. The people are less socially uptight,
Yeah.
they're willing to follow whatever moves them without those social strictures.
So that was not an issue for your time during for the clubs that you went to, that what race was not an issue. You could play if you were white or black or
Yes, right. But now there's Miles Davis.
yep,
There's a documentary on him, and he
yep.
was beaten up and arrested by the police at some point. And a lot of these guys went to jail, white or black, because they were heroin users. But I would say the jazz aficionados were pretty colorblind in that way. I mean, they went for the music.
Yep.
And that was what was important to them. And a lot of these combos had black and white musicians. Paul played with Dave Brubeck, and I think they were all white, but there were all black bands, all white, or some were mixed, but they all played together, for at different places or for, money raising events or whatever. I think it was a very fluid scene.
Because I was researching a lot of these ginormous bands, and I noticed that most of the huge bands, at least that I could find, were mostly all black bands or all white bands. There weren't.
Right. In the 40s, they were not mixed at all.
Yeah,
Those the era of the big bands were not. You probably know much more about this than I do, quite frankly. I mean, I was there, but sometimes people are there know much less than people that are studying it.
so that's pretty much everything I had. I mean, is there anything else that you'd like to leave with? I don't really have very much else.
All right. Well, if I think of something else that you should, I wrote down for you 52nd Street, Leon and Eddie's, Eddie Condon, Birdland, Bradley's, Paul Desmond, Symphony Sid, The Vanguard, Helen Merrill. I don't know why I wrote her down. But anyway, if I think of something interesting to tell you, or if I come when I get back to Miami, if I find any pictures or anything of that time that I have, any ephemera, I'll send it to you.
That would be very appreciative.
Now,
Thank you.
what are you doing with this video now? Is this do you show this video or what do
So
you
the
do?
video I'll just take a couple of your quotes and I'll use the quotes for my perspective piece of, so they break it down by different standards because the state, you have to have standards. So the first perspective was analysis, and then the second project is perspective. So I need to find preferably primary source information or videos or anything and put it all together for the perspective of what I'm learning about. Because
Mhm.
this class that I'm taking is so open that I could do whatever I wanted.
Oh, that's great.
And
Is this a public school?
yep,
Well, that's great. You're lucky to be going there.
this class has changed a lot of the project based learning in Pennsylvania. They've changed a lot of rules because of our class, and it's been a great opportunity for a lot of us because you're not tied down by whatever, like you have to learn about World War II now and you have to do all of this.
Right. And whatever you pick is always going to go out into branches where you pick up other things that are happening. I mean, you're gonna
Absolutely.
learn more than your topic. All right, look, I won't take up any more of your time. If you think of anything else, you can text me. And if I get the stuff together before Thanksgiving, I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you
And
very
one
much.
more question, how did you do with your water polo?
Oh, we last night was so for the weekend I did great. We won all those games. And then last night was senior night and we lost all of
Oh,
them.
oh
But
well.
that's okay. Season's
All
over
right,
now. So
bye, Tommy.
thank you.